Hey guys, welcome to Pickle Tato. Thanks for coming back. As you probably know, we didn't put out something this past Saturday, so we figured we'd just put something out, give you a little personal story for me. Most of the guys that have come through here, they've come through the garage and they've seen something I've been putting together for a couple years. So I'm just gonna, like I said, tell a little bit of a personal story. Back when I was about 5 or 6 years old, my father had a 1950 Chevy 3100 truck, and that's basically what I learned how to drive in. You can imagine, a 5 or 6 year old driving a clutch. It was pretty funny, but he let me go at it, and that's pretty much how I learned how to drive. So he had that truck, his whole life. He passed away, when I was pretty young, still a teenager. And one of the things that I received from that was the truck. Of course, being a teenager, didn't have any money and didn't have anywhere to put it, and so I had it, but I didn't do anything with it. So I joined the Marine Corps back in 92. My mom was single at the time, and she was on a farm. I think it's like 10 or 12 acres or something like that. So she had that truck in the barn. And while I was in the Marine Corps, like I said, I'd come home during leave, a week or two at a time here. And, I'd spend a day or two just messing with it, tinkering with it. I'd sand it down a little bit here and there, but never did amount to much of anything because I didn't, being a private PFC in the Marine Corps, you don't make much money. My mom had got remarried to some guy that he was pretty much a little con artist. So my uncle had called me. I was at Camp Lejeune at the time, and my uncle had called me and asked if he could take the truck and work on it and get it running. And I was like, well, absolutely. I said, you can take it and do whatever you want with it, because I haven't been able to do anything. And he was a pretty good mechanic, so I knew he would get it together and running, at least running. I didn't know what else he was going to do to it. So he got it, and he got it running. He drove it to work, for 2 or 3 years, and it was still in shambles as far as like the body and everything. It wasn't in very good condition, but it did run and drive. He ended up calling me, a couple years after that. He said, "Hey, Bill, I'm moving out from where we're at and where we're going. I can't keep the truck." He said, "I just won't have the room. I just want to know what you want me to do with it." And I had told him from the very beginning, when he took it, I said, "Hey, no matter what happens with this truck, obviously you've put the work in it, it's yours, but if you ever get rid of it or need it out or whatever," I said, "it always comes back to me no matter what." And he agreed to that. So obviously I was the first one he called and said that, he needed to get rid of it. Not having any kind of leave to be able to come home and do anything. So I called my mom and I said, "Hey, my uncle's, your brother's coming. He's going to bring the truck back over. Just put it in the barn, I'll get to it when I can." And she's like, "Yeah, no problem." So just to do the title transfer and bill of sale, it wasn't much money at all. We just gave him whatever, I think it was like $50 or $100 or whatever it was. So she wrote him a check and got it, gave it back to her, and she put it in the barn. So a couple years had gone by, and he had done some stuff. Her husband had done some stuff to it. Basically, they ended up getting a divorce, and come to find out he was a kind of violent guy, and he was just an ass, for lack of a better word. So she called me and said, "Yeah, I've been in court, a couple times, I'm trying to get this resolved." And she never really would tell me what was going on, but she just kept on telling me she was in court. Well, this went on for like 4 or 5 months, and I was like, man, how long does a divorce take, And that guy didn't have much money, and my mom, she wasn't rich, but she was well off. She had enough money to take care of herself and then, enjoy her life. But when they got married, he was a bum, for my opinion. I thought the whole dispute in the divorce was him wanting money and all this kind of stuff, which was the case. But he was using the courts to kind of keep contact with her. And so she called me up crying. She's like, "Bill, everything's agreed upon with divorce. There's just one thing that's been sticking, and it's been sticking for like 4 or 5 months. And, I just don't know what to do." I'm like, well, in my mind, I'm like, well, why are you calling me, asking me? I don't know nothing about what's going on here. I'm like, well, what's he want? Does he want a bunch of money? And she goes, "No, he wants that truck." I'm like, "What truck?" And she's like, "Your dad's truck." And I'm like, "What the hell are you talking about? I mean, that's my truck. I mean, how could that be a dispute? That's mine." And she's like, "Well, when I wrote that check to your uncle, it was a dual checking account and it had his name on it, my name and his name on it." And I'm like, "Listen, I don't care what you do." I said, "That truck does not go to him." I said, "That's my truck." I said, "If I need to come to court and let them know." And she's like, "Bill, I've already been through this." His contention is it was bought with a check with his name on it, and that's why I've been in court for this long. And I'm like, "Well, what are you going to do?" She's like, "Well, I'm going to fight it. I'm going to fight it." So she was fighting it. A couple weeks go by, and 2 or 3 weeks went by. She called me again. She's like, "Yeah, it's still, he's just doing this to be a butt." And so, I said the same thing. I'm like, "Well, Mom, you're going to have to do whatever you can." I said, that's my dad's truck. It can't go nowhere." She's like, I know. So anyway, to move the story along a little bit, about a month or two later, she calls me up bawling, crying, just distraught. She didn't ask me, but I knew she wanted me to say you know, just give him, just be done with it. So I did, you know. She'd been through enough. I figured I would find my revenge on him some way or another. It was done and over with. The truck was gone. And of course, I was pretty upset about it. Mad, angry, you know, sad, all that good stuff. So, all right, so we're gonna push through this. Pretty angry. The truck was gone. So, you know, year two goes by. I found out that that guy who had got my truck, my mom's ex-husband, passed away. You know, good riddance. So it was my mission to try to find where this truck was. So I still had the VIN number and everything to it. So I'd called to the local DMV, gave them the VIN, you know, asked if I could be able to find out who owned it, and I told them the story. And they didn't have any kind of record of that VIN. The last owner was my uncle. Our local DMV, he didn't get it, he didn't register it. I'm talking in succession here, but this was over, you know, you got to remember I was in the Marine Corps. There wasn't too much time to do much of anything when I was there. It was deployment after the, you know, in the field, whatever. The time had gone on, I'd called, you know, another state. I called all the surrounding states DMVs and gave them the VIN. Anyway, no luck. So I looked for a couple years. I called him an investigator, but it wasn't a professional investigator. I just asked him if he could try to do some research with it and try to, you know, if he could have any more time, a little bit more time than I did to try to find the thing. Never amounted to anything. As you can imagine, my mom probably felt pretty guilty about it. As time gone by, the anger kind of, you know, subsided a little bit. I was still mad, but, you know, nothing like it was at the beginning. So my way of dealing with that was just to harass my mom a little bit, you know, 2 or 3 years after it was over with. And every time she would get on me about something I was doing or whatever, I was like, you know, you lost my dad's truck. You know, what are you talking to me? And of course I'd be laughing about it, but I know, you know, she would shut up and wouldn't mess with it anymore. And I could tell she was mad at for me even bringing up. Being immature at the time, you know, it probably hurt her when I was saying that stuff, but I was kind of joking with it, kind of. So it's something I'm not real proud of, but I did harass her a little bit about it. Just got, you know, still a little bit mad about it. So years and years and years go by. I try to keep on, you know, every time you'd move in the military, of course, you know, you'd pack everything up and you have to unbox everything. I mean, we moved, I can't even remember the amount of times we moved, but every time we would go in our new place, somehow our files, we'd have to get our files out of the boxes, and I would just end up finding the information about that truck. I'd find the VIN, so I'd start my quest again of calling around trying to find where this thing was. So finally I got a hold, I don't know how I found out who, or I don't know how I found out the number, but I got a hold of his brother. And he was pretty old at the time when I got his phone number, and I called him and I was like, listen, man, this is, you know, I told him who I was and he knew who I was. He said, Bill, I'm so sorry. He said, you know, I can't believe he did that and all this stuff. I'm like, listen, I'm not trying to cause any trouble. You know, this guy, I'm not going to say his name, but, you know, he'd passed away and you know, that was his family. I get it. So I wasn't calling him to harass or be obnoxious with him. I just wanted to know if he knew where the truck was. And he said that he didn't. He said, Bill, the last time, you know, I knew about that truck is he sold it to somebody in Indiana. And that's the last I know about it. I'm like, all right, man, well, I appreciate it. I mean, that's something. So obviously I went to the DMV in Indiana and, you know, I just never found it. Man, this was bad. You know, all that stuff had happened long time. Like I said, when I was a teenager, when my dad passed away, and that whole situation, man, it must have been in the 98, 99, 2000 time frame, somewhere around then. So fast forward to around, you know, 2019. So my mom had come down and visited us, and as she was going back home, she was driving back home. You know, obviously we lived in different states. She had called me as she's driving back. She's like, Bill, she said, she had sent me a picture first of this old truck. She's like, hey, what do you think about this truck? And it kind of pissed me off, you know. I'm like, why are you sending me this stuff? You know, I'm like, I don't have the capability to get in our truck right now. And so anyway, after, you know, a couple months had gone by, she sent me another picture of another truck. I was like, Mom, why are you sending me this stuff? I'm just showing you these trucks. You know, if you want to put a truck together, you know, I'm just showing you where they're at. I'm like, well, I can't do anything right now. And so my sister has sent me a picture of a truck that she thought for sure it was my dad's, and it was in a field somewhere in it was either Kentucky or Indiana. She was driving down the road somewhere and she was on vacation, or I don't know where she found it. She sent me this picture. It was very, very close to what my dad's was, but the mirrors on it were like a 3600. And anybody that knows these trucks, you know, a 3100 is like a half ton and a 3600 is like a 3/4 ton. But it looked very, very similar, but I just, you know, knew it wasn't the same one. After that, you know, my mom sent me another picture. I'm like, Mom, you got to quit sending me these pictures. I just can't, you know, I just can't do anything. She's like, well, if you find a truck that you want to put together, let me know. She said, I'll help you out. I'm like, well, what do you mean help me out? She's like, well, you know, I'll help you get it. I'm like, all right, well, you know, if I find something, I'll let you know. And it was just so weird. I just, I was going through Marketplace or something like that. And I really wasn't even looking for those kind of trucks. And this thing had just popped up. And this guy was in the middle of a build. Oh, I wouldn't even say he was in the middle of a build. He was at the very, very beginning of a build. The body was put together, but it was, bolted on by like 1 or 2 bolts. So it was just kind of a mock-up. It wasn't really, nothing was together. And he was, selling it for, I thought, a high price. But I just happened to call the guy and said, hey, I seen you got this build. It's what I'm looking for. So I went down there and looked at it. It needed, obviously, a lot of work. And so I called my mom. I'm like, hey, I found this truck. It looks like something I want to put together. She's like, well, is that the one you want? And I'm like, well, I'm not going to get anything that's put together. I would rather get something that I'm, put the work in. I told her, I was like, well, it's not exactly what I want, but I want something I can put together. That way me and, my son can work on it together. And that way I could pass it down to him and, something that he would have. I think that'd be pretty cool. And she's like, well, how much is it? And I told her, she's like, well, come up here. When you got time, just drive up here and get the money. Well, the drive up here is like 6.5, 7 hours away. So I immediately told my wife, I said, I got to go back home to get some money from mom. She didn't even question it. She's like, yeah, go. I go up there and, just, talking, I kind of showed her pictures of what I was doing. She's like, are you going to be able to work on that thing? She's like, that's a lot of work. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Now I'd put cars together before when I was growing up and everything. Not to the extent of where this thing was, but I'd always done something with cars. I was like, well, whatever I can't do, I know people that can help me or do it or show me how to do it or something. I said, it might take 10, 15, 20 years. I said, but we'll get it together at some point. So she brings me in the house and she, how, when you're own a restaurant or whatever, you got a bunch of money, you got to bring it to make, those bank bags or whatever. She pulls out this bag and there was a large sum of money in there, way more than what I was asking or what the guy was asking for. I was like, Mom, I said, this is, way too much. I mean, I'm talking significant more, like $8,000 or $9,000 more. And she's like, hey, she said, I've always felt bad about this, that truck. She said, go get it. She said, I want you to have it. I'm like, okay. So went and bought the truck and it was in shambles. Like I said, the body was not in bad condition. It needed a lot of repair, but it had a frame, had a motor, but the motor was out of an older car. I figured it was going to take me 5 or 10 years to put this thing together. And I figured I'd have to have about 20, 30 grand to get it to where I wanted it. So, but I did anyway. So I went and picked the thing up, brought it back to the house. As everybody knows, 2020, beginning of 2020, COVID started being talked about and nobody knew how big of a deal it was going to be. But, so they kind of put us on a work from home schedule with my work, not having to drive to work and drive home from work and do stuff after you get home with the house or whatever. I had a lot more time to mess with it. Well, during that time, my mom had got COVID and her doctors advised her to go into the hospital. She didn't have very many symptoms or anything, but she had problems with her lungs already, which she was doing pretty good. They had told her that hey, we advise you to go admit yourself because it's going to hit you pretty hard. So without her having any symptoms or anything, she went to the hospital anyway. When she got to the hospital, that's a whole different story we're not going to get into with this story, but kind of like fast forward a little bit, she ended up passing away in the hospital. So of course, that's going to hit anybody hard when their mother dies. So I kind of focused all my attention, all my free time to keep my mind off stuff was to put this truck together. And at the beginning of it, it was to put that truck together in memory of my dad. And then all of a sudden it turned into putting this truck together for my mom and dad. So I think we started at the front. The body looks like it's on there, but it's just laying on there. It's like I said, I had maybe 1 or 2 bolts on it. We got it on my trailer, got it home. As soon as I got it home, I just ripped it completely apart. I took everything off of it and started from the frame. My intentions was to get it running. Just get it running. I just want to get it running and driving. That's how I started it. So as I was tearing it down, I was looking at the frame. So I was like, well, I'm just going to clean this frame up a little bit. Scraping, sanding, taking some of the metal off that didn't need to be, kind of boxing the rear end. Well, as I started getting this frame done, I was like, well, shoot, I've gone this far. I might as well make the frame look good. So I did a lot of work with the frame. The frame is C-notched. Those of you don't know what C-notching is, on the back side, it's just, if a frame is straight like this, you're basically just putting a notch in the frame to where I was going to put it on airbag. So when you let the air out, it's kind of like lays on the ground. I was like, well, if we're going to do all this, we might as well put some good brakes on here. So put some well woods on there. The whole front end, well, it's an S10 frame, and it looked like an old S10 frame. So I was like, well, I'm not going to get this car together. I kept on making excuses with everything I did. I was like, well, first I'm just going to put it together. Well, as I went, I was like, well, this got to be replaced. I'm going to put it new. So I put all new front end on it. So basically the frame is brand new. Brakes are brand new. Everything's brand new. So I'm like, okay, well, the frame's going to be new, but I just want the original body on top of it. I don't even care what it looks like. It's going to drive reliable. Over the 6 months, year goes by, I'm starting to get the frame together. So I start putting the body on the frame to kind of line everything up, get everything mucked up. So as I'm looking at this engine, the engine it was an LS1 that came out of a 2009 Suburban, I think. I'd had a video of this engine running, but I wasn't there. I got the engine from the guy I bought the actual truck from. And he said, yeah, when I bought it, it ran, here's a video of it. And I'm like, okay. So as I'm putting the car together, doing different things. We cut a lot of the metal out, replaced a lot of the floor, the inner and outer cab corners, all the stuff for the middle of the cab. So as the cab started coming together, I'm looking at it, and I'm like, well, I'd hate to get this car together and want to go drive it for the first time, and then the engine's it's just junk. I was like, let me take this engine out. We got I call him famous. Everybody around here knows him. He's a engine builder. Well, he does more than engines, but that's what he's pretty much known for. Builds a lot of engines for hot rods, race cars, and stuff like that. So I brought it down to him, and of course, if you remember during COVID, everything's on back order, all this kind of stuff. So it took about 8 or 9 months, and how that started, I brought it down to him. I was like, hey man, I just want it freshened up. I just want to make sure it's running when I put it back in there. And he's like, well, do you want to add anything? You want to up the horsepower? And I'm like, well, I don't know. What are you thinking? He's like, well, how much horsepower you want? I'm like, well, I don't know. How much can I get? Anyway, it went back and forth before I ended up leaving that place. It ended up being a whole rebuild. You'll see the engine bay. It's an LS1. So we had it stroked. It's got a stage 3 comp cam. The head's coming off of an LS3, I believe, or he had told me he'd reworked the heads, and I think the heads came out of LS3. I'm not sure, but I know the heads were worked through. It's got short tube headers. The intake is stock, but it's got a 102 throttle body on it. It's that's all the major stuff anyway. He had calculated right around 550, 600 horsepower, somewhere in that range. So that's what we ended up with. Went up just to freshen up, and that's what we came out with. So anyway, we got the engine back, started putting everything together. Anything that I didn't know how to do, I had friends that I called, and I'd bring it over to their house, and they would do like the wiring. I can wire a stereo together, but whole car, we were going to use the harness that I had. My brother-in-law had come up. He's not from around here, quite a ways away also, but he'd come up to rewire it for me. And when he got it, he started looking at the harness, and a lot of stuff was just wasn't right. Pretty much had it run, but he was running some issues, and he kept on telling me these issues. And I'm like, you know what, man? Once again, I'm not going to take all this time building this car, and then I get it and start it, and it's just going to crap out. I'm going to buy a new harness. He's like, well, that'd be the best way. So I bought a brand new harness for it. So all that work he had done to it up to that point didn't do much because I was buying a new harness anyway. So I got the new harness, got it all wired, pretty much got it all together. If you look at the front, the grill, the headlights are for a Jeep, basically. They're 7-inch round LEDs. The grill is usually chrome. We had everything powder coated from a real good friend of mine. He was one of our first podcasts that we ever had. I think it was like the second or third maybe. Mark Kennemer, he was Fast Lane Metalworks here locally where I'm at. Phenomenal job. He's taken a lot of time to help me out with this thing. He knows what the truck meant to me, so I think he put that extra effort in it. Turned out really good. So anything chrome on the truck, I brought it to him, he powder coated it. It was like black candy or something like that. It turned out really cool. So as we popped the engine, I kind of already went through the specs with the engine. Engine's pretty well dressed up. So since it's got a stage 3 cam in it, there's not very much vacuum. When I drove it for the first time, the brakes were there, but they wasn't that great. And I'm like, man, these are Wilwood brakes. What is going on here? Brand new brakes, all 4-wheel disc or all the way around. Come to find out, there just wasn't enough vacuum in the engine, so we had to put a separate vacuum pump, which was, a lot more expensive than I thought it was going to be. So that's like the little thing on the side of the firewall. If anybody's wondering what that is, that's a vacuum pump for the brakes. Anything that's drawing vacuum anyway. If we go inside the cab, I had bought 3 different pairs of seats for that thing. All of them were good, but I wanted some seats that actually had the seat belts on the seat. I didn't want to have to bolt down new seat belts inside the truck. So the best option What I ended up with is what's in there right now. I plan on having those recovered. Those are out of a, I think an '05 Chevy Silverado or something like that. All the dash is Dakota digital, so they look like stock, but you'll see as you turn the key on, it's all digital, all LED lights and everything. Come around to the shifter. So it's a pneumatic shifter. If you don't know what a pneumatic shifter is, it's an automatic, but you have to push down, and pull it back, and then you can just slap it forward, through the gears, or just leave it in drive or overdrive, whatever. But the shifter is out of an Apache helicopter. It's the front seat of an Apache helicopter. So the front seat of an Apache has a collapsible cyclic. So that's what you're going to see me. You're going to see me hitting a button, and it's going to be pushed down, and then you pull another button and you can pull it up. Well, the reason that is in the front seat, to get in and out, it's a lot more in the front and it's kind of harder to get into. So they make that cyclic collapsible, so it's easier to get in the cockpit in the front seat. So the back seat doesn't do that. So that's a front seat cyclic out of Apache. Well, a lot of the buttons on there, all of the buttons are functional. They're not all hooked up to what I want them to do right now, but one of them is a start switch. One of them is I used to have it, if you hit the button, like all the airbag, it would all come down at one time. Turn signals, electric fan, all those switches have the ability to do something. Like I said, they're just not all hooked up yet. So as you come around to the back, once again, Mark Kennemer from Fastlane, he had built that bed cover for the most part. When I first went up to him with the idea, we had all these ideas where we were bouncing off each other, and it got really, really busy because I was wanting this whole scene and all this kind of stuff going on. Well, when he had drew it up on CAD, like I said, we went through lots of iterations before he actually started cutting it. As he was making these drawings, I was like, man, that's just way too busy. I was like, we need to simplify this a little bit, So, and anyway, that's what we ended up with. It's American flag, and it's got an Apache helicopter, like the front view of an Apache helicopter on the back of it. Of course, everything's backlit with LED lights and everything. So as you lift up the bed, the forward part of the bed, you can see where all of the air system is. In the center is obviously the tanks. On the sides of it is the compressors. And then you have, in the center, that's what controls where the air goes. One is to dump and one's to fill, if that's what you're wondering why all those little gadgets are in there. Whole air system is 4-linked in the back. All the suspension is kind of custom made by me, whether that's good or bad. The back, usually has a bumper that's very similar to the front, but I just don't like that look. So I got a roll pan that I got, molded that to it, and that's pretty much the truck. Something I want to note on the back end of the bed where it says, in memory of Ron Neal. That was my dad. So the build was done in memory of him, obviously. Brought back a lot of memories as I was doing it. I just remember sitting in the cab for the first time. I was like, man, this cab is small. Because I remember as a kid, being 5, 6 years old, I remember standing up on the floor just to get to the steering wheel and to be able to hit the pedals. But now I'm like cramped in there. So anyway, that's a little personal story for me. I hope you enjoy the footage. Don't ask me if the truck's for sale, because you're going to have to ask my son. If he wants to sell it right now, he can sell it. It's pretty much his. I just drive it. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and we'll get back with you next week with another podcast. We'll see you. We're out.